Hello and welcome to the Authority of Love for this Family Foundation Friday. I'm Greg Williams, your co-host, and I'm joined again by our other co-host, David Walls, Executive Director of the Family Foundation. And David, first of all, welcome again. Thanks for being with us.
It's good to be with you.
Every week, man. I love it. I love it. And, you know, we've had ups and downs throughout all this as far as what we've reported on and shared and talked about. I think this one's a little bit of a high. I think for the most part, the primary election here that happened just this week on Tuesday was a very positive thing. Before I get into that, though, for viewers, you listeners, you'll just have to listen and take our word for it. But for viewers, we are focusing strictly on the Family Foundation today and our backdrop, mainly because I forgot my banner, but more importantly, because of the primary election, and that is now in the books, David.
It is.
And so what I'd like for you to do, from a conservative standpoint, I think it was very encouraging. What would you say to that and explain that?
Yeah, I think it was a really good night for the pro-family, pro-life movement, for the school choice, educational freedom movement. A good night. Candidates that supported those bedrock values did very well in a lot of the Republican primary races. But just to remind our voters, our listeners, hopefully you voted.
Yes.
One of the disappointing things, I believe turnout, Greg, was only about 13%.
Yeah, that's fairly common, unfortunately.
In a primary. But just to remind folks, it was a primary election, Republican primary, Democratic primary in Kentucky. Obviously, on the top of the ballot, I think folks already kind of knew what was going to happen, but what indeed, folks, has happened in other states happened here in Kentucky. Former President Donald Trump overwhelmingly, I think it was like 85% of the Republican primary voters won. Joe Biden, 71%. I will just say one interesting thing, and I have seen some media pick up, Greg, there were 18% of Democratic primary voters in Kentucky that voted uncommitted in that race.
There's certainly some
We're not going to do a deep dive into that, but I did think that was notable. But we're going to spend a good deal, Greg, today just kind of breaking down some of the important, state legislative races. There were some important congressional races on the ballot on the primary side, but most of the incumbents, as normally happens, won.
Right.
But as we look at the state legislative races, as you and I talked, look, the reality is a lot of these districts. What happened on Tuesday is going to determine who represents you in elective office. In some of these districts, here in Lexington, in the district that I live in, there was a contested Democrat primary, and there's not a Republican on the ballot. Right. So the candidate that won is going to be my state representative in November. Right. Conversely, some of the more Republican-leaning districts have some similar dynamics. But as we look across the state, one of the interesting things at play in the media, there was some discussion on this, even in kind of the mainstream media, there was kind of an inter-party battle on the Republican side from what I would say the strong pro-family, grassroots conservatives. Sometimes you hear the media use the term liberty Republicans. Most of them are not libertarians, but they support freedom and liberty and opportunity.
Yes.
And then some of the more establishment side of the Republican Party, and you saw a whole lot of money be spent in these races.
Yes.
And one of the Greg, you may have brought this up in one of our previous podcasts. There was a group set up called the Commonwealth Conservative Coalition that was primarily funded by the Jefferson County Teachers Union and Churchill Downs.
Which, just let me say, they're not conservative.
They're not conservative
from a conservative standpoint.
Right. They spent a whole lot of money in a number of Republican primary races, and except for maybe one, all their preferred candidates lost up and down the ballot. But just a couple of notable ones. There was a number of contested races, Greg, up in northern Kentucky, and in House District 60. Marion Proctor, who's a great pro-family conservative champion in the legislature, she was overwhelmingly won her primary race, something like 76% of the votes. Also, there was an open seat, House District 66, a very contentious race where T.J. Roberts was running against former state representative Ed Massey, who was has kind of been known as someone who was against school choice.
Yeah.
T.J. Roberts overwhelmingly won that district.
That was one of those establishment ones, right?
That was
establishment.
Yeah, absolutely. Massey, and that seat had been State Representative Steve Rawlings had beat Ed Massey in the primary in the last election cycle. He had been a very conservative, reliably pro-family vote. He ended up not running for re-election in that seat, but had run for the open seat in that area for state senate because Senator John Schickel had retired. Not to get too far in the weeds, but Steve Rawlings overwhelmingly won. So he is the Republican nominee for a state senate district seat, now. Right, but that race, in those races, got a lot of attention because of some of the school choice dynamics. Yeah. But the candidates that solidly support school choice pretty much won those races in a number of notable. I'll mention one other before we've got one here locally that we want to talk about. Right. Candy Massaroni, who's in Nelson County, very strong pro-life, pro-family leader in the legislature. She had been challenged by someone that was running to her left, I would say, in the primary. She overwhelmingly won her primary race with 64% of the vote, in spite of the fact that some of that money that we were talking about was spent against her. Yeah. So it was encouraging to see, and I want folks to be encouraged that that candidates that stood strong on conservative values, that support life, support religious freedom, support educational freedom, voted for some of the important bills to protect kids from gender transitions and to save women's sports. Those issues resonated with voters, it seemed, in the election, which I think is an encouragement for us in the Commonwealth moving forward to say it's good to know that voters are rewarding those that are standing strong on principled convictions. Yeah.
And I mentioned this, you are a good friend with Wednesdays for Women with the Dia Wishner. I mentioned this thing that I'm going to build on what you just said, David. I mentioned this, that when the Amendment 2 on the ballot a couple of cycles ago, and the governor's race all seemed to focus on this issue of pro-life versus pro-abortion kind of thing, and it seemed like it was moving in a not positive direction. Yeah. This seems to show that we may be being more enlightened and informed and educated and corrected, and that brings me to my next point. Two things. The local race here, we're going to talk about that a little bit, but also the impact of the surveys, and in particular your all scorecard. I want you to share with our listeners, because I think it'll help in the general election as well. I know that some of the articles in the mainstream media were saying that you all were manipulating, or made it sound like you all were manipulating, and said manipulating to me says I say one thing and then do another. Right? Explain to the listeners what the scorecard says so that we can talk about what happened in this district.
Yeah, so as Greg, you and I talked, we partner with iVoter Guide first to produce a informative educational voter guide that looks at a full host of information that candidates, their voting records, who's supporting them, the issue questionnaire that they fill out. And so I'm so thankful that so many folks use that guide, and we heard from so many of them, even on election day, saying, thank you for helping produce this. This helped me, cast an informed vote. And that just warms my heart, because that's why we do it. One of the other resources that we produce is our legislative scorecard. And that's not a voter guide. That's simply just, we look at the votes on important pro-family bills that the Family Foundation has supported, or that are known as important pro-life, pro-family issues. And we just compile how legislators vote on those issues. We also look at what bills they sponsor, and we weight all that together to just give a picture of how legislators voted on important issues. And we simply just score those based on the percentage of how they voted. And that's a resource that, and I'll plug it. You can go to our website at KentuckyFamily.org. We just released our newest scorecard for the 2024 General Assembly. But we put that out there just to shine a light, so constituents of their representatives can know, oh, look, they voted on this important deal. I want to know how they voted. That's what the scorecard is there for.
Well, and here's the interesting thing, because I don't think very few, if any, would disagree with what I'm getting ready to say. If you call yourself a conservative, as far as legislature and policy and things like that. You're probably standing for life, probably strongly for life. You're probably standing for school choice because it actually makes things better.
Right.
The research shows both of those things. You're probably standing for you're probably standing against the destruction of boys and girls and their bodies in the gender dysphoria issue. You probably are. If you call yourself a conservative, then you are telling people that would generally think of this, that's where I stand.
Yeah.
So then when somebody comes out and says, I'm a conservative,
right,
and then you look at the scorecard and they're against the first two and for the latter one, and for gambling as another one, gambling which has been shown to really destroy marriages and families, and that's, then you're the one that's manipulating.
Yeah.
And that's what we saw in District 45, David, to be honest. That's really what we saw.
Well, and we kind of saved one of the most notable races for the end in House District 45, which does include a portion of Fayette and Jessamine
this
County.
listening audience, yes.
Thomas Jefferson, who was challenging the incumbent state representative, Killian Timpany. I mean, a lot of folks, I was surprised to see the margin. He won 72-28. I mean, that's a tremendous...
And the money was behind Timpany, the establishment money, the liberal money,
hundreds
called
of
itself
thousands
conservative.
of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And look, I have tremendous respect for everyone that serves in the legislature. I've had a number of very cordial conversations with Representative Timpany. I'm thankful for his willingness to serve, but he was very straightforward. He voted against the bill to save women's sports. Right. He voted against school choice repeatedly. He voted even against last session against SB 150, the bill to protect kids from gender transitions. Right. And look, he didn't shy away. Those were his views.
That's his stance.
And our scorecard that we put out simply just showed how he voted on those issues. And I'm encouraged to see that voters did not respond to someone who supports those kinds of problematic. I would even say, if you're not willing to protect kids from gender transitions, I mean, that's, Greg, we've broken this down, but that's a horrific practice. And so thankful that the legislature took action to ban that practice. But Representative Timpany has continued in the media to say that he stands behind his vote against that bill. And as the media has even reported, some of those votes were front and center on voters' minds, and it was clear in that district that they were wanting to go a new direction and sent a pretty big signal. In fact, so much so that the paper here has been talking about this race quite a bit since.
And you guys got some great publicity. And here's my point in all that. If you read the articles, it makes it sound like you guys were the ones manipulating. You put it straight forward.
Information out.
He said, here's what I voted for, and this is what my record came up as a conservative.
And Thomas Jefferson, as was reported in the media, he ran he went and door knocked. He did all the things. He contrasted himself. And and that was what happened in a lot of these races. Those that are willing to get out there, put the work in, go meet voters, to take a principled stand on the issues, and if your actions back up your words, on the whole, you were rewarded for that. And that's something I think Christians should be encouraged by with this election.
Right. And you said it, we'll get into this more, but another good thing was not only one of those issues that was very positive is I think the school choice, educational freedom people really came out well in the election.
There was some national school choice advocates that were like, wow, look at these Kentucky results. This is good for the movement for educational freedom.
Well, David, excellent. KentuckyFamily.org. You can get more information, loveandwordship.com. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for your prayers. Thanks always to the Lord. Make it a great day in the Lord, and God bless in Christ. I'm Greg Williams with our co-host David Walls, and you're listening to The Authority of Love. Be sure to join us on Monday for new programs. Thank you, and God bless.